Is there freedom in being wrong? That is what we're talking about today on Ideas to Human Better with my guest, Zack Blakeney. He is a consciousness and self-mastery mentor. I met him at a retreat that I attended, a transformational retreat that truly was incredibly transformational. And since then, we have been Instagram buddies, and I've been on his podcast, and now he is on mine. And I'm so excited to have you meet him and dive into this topic and many more things on self-mastery and consciousness. So without further ado, Zack Blakeney. Hello, my friend. How are you?
What's up, Eva? I'm doing very well today. Thank you for asking.
Yay. I'm so excited to have you on the show and just talk about some of these areas and things. I know that after the retreat, we didn't talk much during the retreat because, you were doing your thing and I was in the transformation phase.
Yeah.
But afterwards, just getting to sit down and talk with you. And there were so many things that were just in alignment. And you're just this wealth of knowledge when it comes to consciousness and how do we master ourselves and how do we transform and what is the ego and what is the freedom in being wrong. So I love that this is your area of expertise and that you're here to share some of this today with the folks. So thank you for being here today. I appreciate it.
It's my honor. Happy to be here.
Yay. Okay. So before we dive into some of these topics, I just would love for people to just get a little snippet more about who you are and how you got to be here today with me on this podcast. So I know that's like probably a whole podcast in and of itself, but how would you sum up your journey thus far in this human experience?
I would sum it up with a lot of suffering and pain.
Okay.
So,
Wow. All right. All right. Still suffering and pain, or was it suffering and pain, transformation, less suffering and pain? Where are we at?
yes, I would say that's more of it, but also I'm not immune to pain in my present moment as well. So what I would say is I've realized through my life that the further away we get from who we truly are, the more chaos we experience in our life is always an opportunity to find who we are through our experiences and to create clarity. So for me, I was raised in a middle class white American family. I have nothing to complain about my upbringing. My father was in the military. My mom was a stay-at-home mom. Again, had everything that I could ever want. And within that, we also had some privileges. And one of those privileges was, having the new computer and also having access to the new internet. So for me, as a 14-year-old boy and curious about sex, and broadband internet came through when I was 14 in the year 2000, if anybody is remembering the dial-up to broadband age.
Mhm.
Well, that was a flood of a lot of video pornography. And again, as a 14-year-old horny boy and being told not to watch it and not to do anything with it, I was curious. So that was the beginning of what became a 16-year addiction to pornography. And again, at the time, in my innocence, I didn't know the difference. But it really did become something that became an addiction, a very damaging addiction for me. It ruined relationships over and over again, not only romantic relationships, but friendships. It caused a lot of internal suffering for me. I was disconnected with love. I really didn't even know what love was or could identify it inside of myself. Inside of my relationships, especially with my ex-wife, I felt the deepest love for her, and it was an instant thing. And I just could not experience it in intimacy. And what I know sex to be now is the most pure form of an energy exchange of love between two human beings. And I was unable to experience it during that time. So the porn addiction, which, there's so many things that happen in porn addiction that people are unaware of.
Yeah. Can we talk about that for a second though? Like, I just want to dive into that just for a tiny bit. Cause I mean, I have an ex-husband with well, I don't know if it's like alcohol. Like, are you always an addict? Do you move past it? Whatever. Anyway, he struggled with it, but neither one of us even knew that that was a thing. It was just like one day I just found, I mean, pages and pages of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And I was so afraid to communicate around anything. Like I knew 3 months into our marriage that there was something going on. And at the time we were a Mormon, and the bishop, the head of the church, was like, just take his passwords, just don't let him look. But I had no idea. This was like seriously something happening in the brain. And I don't think he did either until we were like way far down, 16 years into a marriage, things are falling apart. And all I kept saying in therapy was, I think it has something to do with porn. I think it has something to do with the porn. And he would just be like, it's just porn. It's just porn. Like that's what I kept hearing.
Yeah.
So not until my sister was like, this is not normal, Eva. There is something wrong here, And so can we just unpack that a little bit? Like, when did you even go like, okay, hold on, there is something here. I mean, I don't think a lot of people out there even know when you hear porn addiction, they're like, okay, yeah, whatever. But that's a real thing. There's really something happening in your brain and then, in your body and your spirit and your mind and all the things. So can you talk a little bit about that? And when did you realize like, oh my gosh, this is a problem? And this is something that that's not just as easy, like just stop.
Yeah, I think college is when I really started to understand it to be a problem, and I knew it, but I wasn't aware of it. So the
Mm.
distinction that I'll make here is that the dialogue that I would tell myself was that I knew it was a problem. But if anybody asked me about it, if I were to relate my thought process to my partners or any of the problems I was experiencing, then I would avoid it and say it wasn't a problem. So when I was with
Mm.
myself, and I was in my own contemplation of self, I knew that it was.
Mhm.
First of all, one of the main things that happened to me at a very young age in college is experiencing what's called porn-induced erectile dysfunction. So porn-induced erectile dysfunction is where ultimately you have watched porn enough times that you become dependent on it for your sexual arousal, your sexual intimacy. So in a very real way of saying this, you've mapped your sexual arousal to a computer and
Mm.
videos. So I had no problem getting an erection prior to, I could literally be pulling out my laptop and opening up and starting to get an erection just thinking about watching porn and the imagery that I would want to watch to get off to. But when I was with a physical partner in front of me, I couldn't be present because my mind was focused on what I
Mm.
thought would get me an erection, which would be, the pornographic images. And, and then all this guilt and shame comes up because I'm not actually present with my partner, whoever it is at the time.
Mhm.
So I started to experience porn-induced erectile dysfunction in college. And this was after, again, 6 or 7 years of probably watching it 2 or 3 times a day. And this is also, we get into subconscious at this point. This is a subconscious programming of how you do it. And just to ground people in the understanding of sexual arousal and how it can be mapped to anything, Nazi soldiers would get sexually aroused to putting Jews into a gas chamber and killing them.
Wow.
So sexual arousal can be, again, attached to some of the most heinous things that you could ever think of. So especially pornography. And with that, I would experience performance anxiety, right? So fear of having sex. I had fear of having sex. And of course, I would manifest into not being able to perform. So I started to use Viagra and Cialis, and those were helpful. But those were just
My
band-aids.
gosh, how young were you? You were using those super young.
21, 22.
Wow.
So I do want to say that the way that I have friends that watch porn that, it's not a problem, at least not to the extent of what mine was.
Right.
Each human being is going to be individual in the way that they map their thought process and create those neural pathways of what they think about themselves and what they think about what they're doing. And it really is a matter of resistance and acceptance. But for me, that was happening at a very young age. So as this continued, there is something called dopamine escalation with pornography. So what this really means, without going into detail, because the detail actually doesn't matter in this way, is that over time you can watch the same type of pornography. Like, let's say I was watching BDSM. Over time, BDSM doesn't have the same dopamine release as it did the first time.
Right.
So it becomes less satisfying. So then you look to watch something different and watch something different and then watch something different, watch something different. I've watched some of the most unrealistic and in some ways heinous things during my time when I would explore pornography. And it just took me further and further away from what, sex with another human being actually was. And in some ways, well, in huge ways, I would question my identity. I would question whether I was a good person with some of the things that I
Mhm.
was watching. So that guilt and shame would go through. And, the thing about addiction, so I'm going to kind of ground us away from the porn for a second,
Yeah.
is that, first of all, the broader definition of addiction that I've come through is that it's the never ending search outside of yourself for fulfillment. That alone is an addiction. And that is the baseline of searching and searching and searching and, seeking. What are we really seeking? We're really seeking love. But then we can actually get ourselves attached to highly dopamine uh, producing behavior like drugs, porn, alcohol, whatever it is. But I believe that porn has the hardest emotional cycle to break because you're coming from avoiding reality because of stress, anxiety, guilt, and shame that is compounded over time from watching porn again. So then you escape. Then you go and you start watching porn. So a part of dopamine escalation isn't that you're watching different things. Like I would open up like 10 tabs at a time, and every tab I would open would be another shot of dopamine. And most of the time I wouldn't watch all 10 of them, right? You just, one or two or whatever else. And then you ecstasy, right? Orgasm, right? So you're going from literally the lowest emotion on the human spectrum, as it relates to the Hawkins scale of consciousness of shame and guilt, to ecstasy, one of the highest emotions that you feel. So it's a really big emotional roller coaster. And then afterwards, you have your ecstasy moment, and then you start thinking about what you've done. You feel guilty for what you've watched. You feel shameful that I did a bad thing, guilt. I am a bad person, shame. And then again, you bring those emotions back into your present moment that only compounds your stress and anxiety on who you are. So the emotional cycle is one of the toughest things to break. But the men that I specifically work with, whether I've actually, I have a program that's specifically for men to help them heal in 90 days. And then also a lot of leaders and entrepreneurs struggle with this. I mean, there was a story that came out recently that a 3-star general in the White House, porn got found all over his computer. So nobody's immune from this.
Right.
And a lot of leaders and entrepreneurs do use pornography to escape, right? Not really understanding what it's doing to them on an internal world. So it's an emotional addiction. It actually is an addiction to porn. It actually is an addiction to alcohol. It's an addiction to guilt and shame and ecstasy. And until we heal from these emotions, which are the causality for the effect, the action, then you're going to continue to do the same effect or action over and over again. So the bishop's response to you was terrible advice.
Right. Yeah, I figured that.
There are apps that can literally block all, obscene websites or anything that even can be that. And then you can have a sponsor that has the password that you can send that to. But sure, that might stop you from watching porn for 90 days, but a really creative person will just go into somebody else's computer or do something else,
Yeah. Yeah. He found other ways. I just that was not a solution. Yeah.
Yeah, but it doesn't heal the guilt and shame that they're ultimately experiencing, right? So I can take away porn, and then you can attach onto drugs. I can take away drugs, you can attach onto alcohol. It doesn't matter what it is. It really is about doing the inner work to heal from the guilt and shame from the experiences that you have. And many times, although porn creates more guilt and shame, a lot of this is coming from a deep feeling of unworthiness that has happened in other areas of your life, right? Because unworthiness is shame. Right. So if you feel unworthy at a baseline, which I'll tell you that I can experience unworthiness in a week still, and you're attached to it, which is the difference, then whatever action comes from that is just compounding the feeling of being unworthy. This is what we can consider, we can call it an identity loop. That's what psychology calls it. But really, it's a victim loop. It's a emotion, and then it's a belief about what you feel, and then it's an action, and then it's an emotion that reinforces the belief to continue that loop to happen over and over again. So for me, that was happening. And then again, things started to build. So I got married, and then about a year into the marriage, I started getting addicted to drugs. And I had been smoking marijuana since I was like 20. So, I was probably addicted to marijuana at that time as well, but I got into harder drugs, cocaine, ecstasy, whatever I could get my hands on to elicit another high. And then that was a problem. And all the time I was, hiding this addiction from my ex-wife, and hiding as a symptom of shame. Anything that you hide, you're ultimately shameful about, or you'd be transparent about it. And so that ended up with a divorce. Now, interestingly enough, I had come out, well, I say come out about my porn addiction. It was really forced out. And this is an interesting story because my ex-wife had found the porn on my phone. She had walked me out to my car that we had driven together to the gym, because at the time we had a fitness training business together, and she just opened up my phone and said, "What is this?" And I denied it. She said, "It's not me." She says, "It's on your phone. Who else could it be?" I was like, "It's not me." And finally she said, "If you don't tell me the truth right now, I'm leaving you right now." And I even denied it the third time initially.
Were
And
you in panic in that moment? Were you
oh
like,
yeah,
"Oh my gosh, what do I do? What do I say?" And so it was just like deny, instead of just being like, "Yeah, I did that."
yeah. No, I denied it the third time. And then after the third denial, immediately after, I broke down and accepted it and admitted what it is. I mean, denial is what's behind all that? Fear. I was afraid that she was going to leave me, right?
Right.
I mean, that's the ultimate fear. I was afraid of being abandoned. I was afraid she was going to leave me. I was afraid of being alone. All of that, again, being the causality to my behavior and my belief system. So after that, she didn't leave immediately. I actually went and got help. But I went to an anxiety therapist and also a sex therapist. The sex therapist recommended that I go to these support groups, and I went to about two. And the reason why I went to two is because intuitively it felt wrong. Because the first thing I had to do was say, "Hi, my name is Zach. I'm a porn addict." So that's what's wrong with the 12 steps right away. Or, I say wrong, and we're going to talk about wrong.
Yeah, yeah.
We'll use it. We'll use it in this way for now.
Is that because you're identifying as it? Like you're saying is that what makes it quote unquote wrong? Is like attaching that identity to yourself, saying now I am this person.
Yep. So
right? Okay.
now they're using it with an intention to have you admit or accept that you are.
Right.
But ultimately that just loops you into always believing that you are.
Right. It could be a different way of phrasing that, right? Like I struggle with this,
Mhm.
or this is a challenge in my life
Yeah.
currently.
I
Right.
accept that. I would rephrase it to, I accept that I have chosen the experience of watching porn multiple times, and I am here to heal from that. Right. I'm not saying I am something. I accept. Right. I mean, these are the things I work with if I work with any of my, the guys I work with inside of the programs. And it just didn't feel right. Also, what was happening is I was being triggered by everybody else's stories. Like I'm just fantasizing about the things that you're talking about at this point. Like, how is this helping in a sense of me releasing this and leaving this behind? The one thing she did say that I did was to stop all sex, anything for 90 days. And I did it. And I did it because I had so much fear and pain behind that I didn't want to lose my ex-wife. That was a huge motivator for me. So after 4 months, so the 90 days plus an extra 30, I was able to have sex with my ex-wife for the first time without having to use Viagra, Cialis, or anything like that. But I became very prideful about my healing, and I was like, look at me, I healed from porn. But the problem is that it's not just porn. There's also MAP behaviors that are around the use of porn, which is lying, manipulating, controlling. And I was still doing those things. Because if you're doing it in one way, you're doing it in other ways of your life. And that's ultimately why she chose to leave, is because even though I had gotten over the porn addiction per se, I still had behaviors that were associated with hiding and lying and shame. And she couldn't deal with that anymore. So once she left, I spent about a month blaming her and just, in my own suffering and my own victim.
Yeah.
And then I was meditating. And I remember it very clearly that I was meditating, and a voice spoke to me and it said, "What would happen if you took 100% responsibility for all your experiences to this point?" And something just switched. That's the best way I can describe it, is that I instantly started to see all of my bullshit. I instantly started to see all the ways that I wasn't taking responsibility. And that became a huge motivator for me. That was actually that message from source, my higher self, whatever, became a message for me to start to seek, but seeking in a way that I would say was actually beneficial to an understanding of myself. So I started in a very masculine way of healing, which is why. So wanting to answer the question, why did this happen to me? Why did I show up this way? Why did I do these things? So I started exploring subconscious remapping, neurochemistry, neuroplasticity, epigenetics, the whole nine, right? And just as science does, science is logic, and logic always ends in a stalemate. So I was able to answer a lot of questions why. But ultimately, I felt like there was still something missing. I call this the substantial reality, the thing that is real. And also what was missing was more of a feminine aspect to the healing, which was forgiveness, self-compassion, grace for myself. And once I integrated the self-compassion and the forgiveness, then I was starting to release the karmic energy, essentially what had happened. But that is what drove me into this now understanding of what I know now, which is unity consciousness, oneness, that God and I are not separate. I'm not saying that I am God. I say that I'm God pretending to be a human being. And that's always the distinction between the two. I did not create me. The creator created me, or God created me, but simultaneously God is inside of me. So just to give you a brief explanation of this, if you look at the first Hermetic principle, the principle of mentalism, if anybody has looked into this, if they haven't, I highly suggest the Kabbalion as a book to really get associated with this. Essentially says that the all is mind and the universe is mental. And the example to this is that if you think about William Shakespeare as the author of Hamlet, Hamlet is the character of Shakespeare. So in some way, Hamlet is a part of Shakespeare, but in other ways, Hamlet is completely different from Shakespeare. We create in the same way that God created this universe and created us. We create through our own characters, our own desires for creation that we imagine in our mind, and then we put forward in some sort of artistic way. And when I say artistic way, all creation is art. So don't think about just like, painting or anything like that. So once I realized this, and the realization and the integration were two different things. So the realization that, oh my goodness, I have, felt separate from God my entire life, and that was my source of unworthiness, of being unworthy of God's love. And then to realize that I am God, that I am a portion of God, such, and that I'm unified with my Creator, started to heal that unworthiness, that deep unworthiness. And that brought me into a way of looking at this illusion that we call reality in a way that actually makes sense logically. I started to really understand that, oh, this is literally just an illusion, a matrix, so to speak, that we are collectively creating through the creator that's inside of us, and that we influence this illusion by our willpower to create. So that's really what brought me into all of this, is this journey of, immense suffering. And again, I can't even put words to what it actually feels like, but I would tell you that suffering feels the same for all humans. We have different stories that create the suffering, but suffering feels the same for everyone. And out of that suffering into a divine purpose of what I'm doing with my life now.
Yeah. Isn't that so interesting how so many stories it's either through like awe and wonder, by doing something like so spectacular or observing something that we can have that transformation. We can also have that transformation through immense suffering.
Yeah.
And for most humans, at least in my experience, there's a lot more transformation that happens through the suffering path than through the awe and wonder path. Why is that? Why do we find ourselves? It's almost like I look at my kids now and I think, oh, what is in store? Like, do you have to go through all this pain and suffering of your own, your own journey to come out on the other side? Can we experience that in different ways? And why are we stuck in this sort of this pattern of coming into the world, attaching to identities, going through pain and suffering, and then coming out the other end? And it's almost like we kind of keep doing that, but we do it maybe a little better each time, hopefully.
Yeah, so suffering forces your consciousness to grow. That is really where it's at. And also, we come into this world unaware of, our true essence, our nobody, who we are. And when we're unaware of that, then we are influenced by our environment, teachers, parents, pastors, whatever it is that's in our environment, the news, right? The environment of the actual civilization or country that we're in, to believe what they believe. And victims have been raising victims for generations. So we're talking about a victim mindset or a victim consciousness that then is put on to our children, and they adopt these beliefs. And that's the journey of going way far away of who we are. Like I kind of said in the beginning, like to really know who you are, you have to know who you're not. So you get to find out who you're not through this process. And unfortunately, a lot of people continue to live who they're not, and they experience the depression and the dissatisfaction with life. But then others, it's like a pressure cooker. There's so much pressure that gets built from the suffering that it pops, right? And the pop is the awakening that, wait a second, maybe everything I thought I was right about, I'm not. Maybe all the things that people told me that this reality is, it isn't. And becoming curious, right, about what it really means to live an authentic life, to live independently, to think for yourself, which is, I think, one of the worst things that our school system does to our children is it takes away independent thought, which can be a whole other rabbit hole. But we are mapped to not think independently. We're mapped to rely on other people to think for us. So then we start to think independently. We become curious. And some people become curious and have a momentary awakening, called a non-abiding awakening, and then they just kind of slip back into the matrix, so to speak. They think it's too hard to do the inner work, so they're just going to tolerate their suffering instead. Where others have the will to ascend, so to speak, to ascend above their bullshit, to ascend above their suffering, and to really start to question why this is the case, and to acquire wisdom. So wisdom is the ability to learn through your experience, where understanding is thinking that you know something without having the experience. So ultimately, I couldn't get to a place of having wisdom about my life and this reality and everything else that's going on without the suffering to know the difference. This is the principle of polarity, again, Hermetic principles, that says that, hey, you are both shadow and light simultaneously. And the more you understand your shadow, the more light you bring to the world. So is it a have to? I don't know. I would never say that it's a have to, in a sense that we have to do this. But it seems to be a part of the divine design of the reality that we're in right now.
So how does someone know okay, granted, if you're suffering, then there's a place to shift to. But for the everyday Joe, how do they even know they're in the matrix? How do they even know they need to wake up? Like we're just living our lives out there, waking up, going to a job, doing the thing, coming home. Like, how do we even become aware that there's a whole different way of being and showing up in this world?
I would say the number one way is that if you allow the outside environment to influence your internal world, that is the mindset of the victim. It's reaction rather than creation. So if you're reacting to everything that's happening in your life, then you would take the stance that things are happening to me, and I'm just reacting to what's happening to me. If you come from a stance of creation, say, well, I am creating and responsible for all the things that are in my current reality, and I have the power to create something new. And, that was a realization that came to me as well. Once I kind of started to heal from, all this suffering that I had, I was like, wow, I was powerful enough to create all this suffering for myself. That also means I'm powerful enough to create joy and happiness and love in my life. But again, that's the difference between being a victim and a creator. The victim mindset will continue to loop you into, excuses and reasons of your external influence on why you can't shift internally. Where the creator says, no, I am the cause of my external environment, and I can shift it just by the way that I am in my own way of being.
Dang. So true, right? It's that awareness. It's just having a little bit of awareness of where's those influences coming from. Yeah, a lot of people are influenced by, the media, propaganda. For the longest time, I thought we didn't have propaganda here in the United States. Like, it was everywhere else. I literally grew up thinking that we are the only ones that have freedom, and everyone else in the world is under some kind of oppression. And it's just been like so mind blowing as an adult to go, oh my gosh, there's so much propaganda here in the United States, and we really are not as free as we think we are.
Yeah.
And these other countries do have more freedoms in different ways. And there's propaganda everywhere, but it's just becoming aware of like, oh, I see you're trying to influence me. Oh, I see I'm picking up this victim mentality. This you had an Instagram reel, and it talked about two cars and an accident, and there are no accidents. And I just loved that concept that you talking about these choices that we're making all the time, that everything is a choice and there are no accidents. Can you just touch on that a little bit?
Yeah, first I'm going to invite you to go look at the comments because people did not like that. Yeah, so when we talk about there aren't any accidents, right, in life, I'll just regurgitate the post that I made. So just look at a car accident. Driver one, chooses to leave his house at 6 p.m. He chooses to go 17 miles over the speed limit. He also chooses to to be on his phone, and he's not aware that there's a stop sign coming up. He rolls through the stop sign.
Mm-hmm.
Driver two leaves the bar at 6 p.m., same time. Driver two is intoxicated, chooses to be intoxicated and drive simultaneously. With that, driver two can't really see the road very well and is distracted just through their intoxication. And let's say driver two is also looking at their phone, because why not? And driver two rolls to the stop sign and they hit each other. Now we call this an accident, right? But ultimately, this is a series of choices that led to that accident. What if driver one leaves the house at 5:55? Does he hit that woman? Probably not. What if driver one chooses to go the speed limit? What if driver one chooses not to look at their phone? What if driver two chooses not to choose to get an Uber, right? And doesn't drive home. There's just choices that lead up to it. So going back to the principle of mentalism of cause and effect, essentially it says that chance or an accident is a law not recognized. And inside of saying that you believe in accidents, you're also victimized by accidents and luck, because you then will not take responsibility for the choices that you made that led up to the experience.
Mm-hmm.
So when we look at this and really start to understand the perception of, again, being the creator and cause of all the different experiences in your life that you've had, are having, will have, at first it can be very heavy. It can bring a lot of sadness and fear and all the things that come with that, doubt and insecurity and regret about how you've been and all these things. But once you heal from those things, you start to realize that responsibility, which is ultimately what this is, goes from feeling very heavy internally to actually very light. That you dissolve the victim loops of blame and complain, that you dissolve the victim loops of regret, and you just ultimately just say, okay, I'm responsible. What do I choose? And how do I choose to go forward to create an effect that truly serves me in my life?
Mm-hmm. Wow. Can I ask you, what were people's comments? Why didn't they like it?
Oh man, you just
You gotta go look. I just wonder if that's those own people's own, like, butting up against it. Like, no, it's not true. It's not.
Man,
There are accidents,
yeah.
like it's that ego coming up, right?
Yeah. So like when there was some things that was like, oh, what if I, get on an airplane and the airplane crashes? That has to be an accident. I'm like, you chose to fly at that time. And then let's think about the plane. How did the plane crash? You don't know. Maybe they didn't do their check for the plane, right? Like maybe there was, maybe the pilot hit a wrong button. Like there's so many different ways that this has occurred. When you start thinking about the cause isn't just you, that there are multiple causes that can lead to a group accident. Well, that'd be like, we call it a group accident at this point, a group plane crash, right?
Right.
Of how that could be influenced. But how did you ultimately contribute? Well, you chose that flight and you chose to get onto that flight. And then when we really get ethereal, you also were the one that forgot to do the check on the airplane. You also are the captain that ended up pressing the wrong button. You also, right? So it's getting to the point. This is unity consciousness coming into play. That every other is actually me, right? It's just another me inside of this. But yeah, they just didn't like it. I even had somebody like screenshot the definition of an accident, and they were talking about intention.
They really went out of their way, huh? They're really triggered by it. Like, that'd be like, you got some deep work. That this is like showing up for you, especially the people who, I feel like when anything triggers you in that way, it's like it's a moment for you to be reflective on yourself. Like, why is this hitting me this way? Why am I feeling this way? Like, what is this saying about me right now that I need to look at, or that I could look at?
I had somebody trying to psychologically break me down and calling me a victim, saying that I'm the only victim here and that I must blame everybody and I must live a miserable life. And I'm like, okay, well, keep projecting out your BS onto me, and hopefully you can see it in yourself at some point. But it's kind of what we talk. We go back to that freedom of being wrong. People are willing to fight for their limitations. They're willing to fight for their suffering just to be right.
Yeah. Isn't it interesting that, one of my things I always say is divine timing. And yet I'll say it when it's beautiful things. Oh, divine timing, we were meant to meet. Oh, divine timing, this or that. But when it's something like not so great, I don't want to call it divine timing. I don't want to say like, oh, I'm this is my fault, or I'm a contributor to this situation. That's not divine timing. That is an accident. So
Yeah. Yeah. Well, yeah. See, and that's just the distinction I talked about, being God playing human. So you have your divine self that knows that it's all divine timing, that everything that's happening inside of your life is happening for you. And ultimately, again, we learn through our experiences, and most of our experiences, we experience suffering to learn. And then the human side of you, the ego mind, right, is the one that adamantly rejects that perception and says, no, it can't be my fault. It has to be somebody else's fault. No, this can't be of God. This is evil. Maybe they say that, right? And tries to rationalize how this couldn't be. But ultimately, every single thing that your egoic mind tries to avoid causes you suffering. It is an illusion of avoidance. And what we like to say inside of our context is, what you avoid creates a void inside of you and is the source of you feeling incomplete or broken.
Yeah. Okay, let's talk about this. Self-mastery. I mean, this is what it is, right? We're ultimately trying to become masters of this piece of ourselves that we think is broken or that what needs some adjusting, and this freedom of being wrong. So let's kind of dive into that a little bit. Like, how do we
Yeah.
self-master, and what is this freedom of being wrong? Like,
So I talk about the freedom of being wrong just to combat people's ego, right?
yeah, yeah,
Because the ego wants to be right. Again, like what I just said, I mean, they want to be right about their suffering, and they want to be right about their belief systems. They want to be right about whatever it is, because ultimately you've attached your self-worth to being right. And I'm here to tell you that as long as you do that, you'll never feel worthy, because right and wrong are subjective. What is right to you could be wrong to somebody else. And even on a grander scale of atrocity, people have killed each other over right and wrong. Countries start wars over right and wrong. Religions start holy wars over right or wrong. And if you want to know how ridiculous a holy war is from a point of unity of consciousness, it is God killing God over their belief in God.
yeah,
It's,
yeah.
it's insanity. Which is ultimately what the ego is. One of my favorite quotes from A Course in Miracles is that the ego is totally logical, but clearly insane.
Mm.
So it's insanity. And it leads us down this path of just wanting to be right about things, even though, again, what we want to be right about doesn't serve us. So I say the freedom of being wrong because ultimately, when we're willing to be wrong, what happens is that we get out of our myopic view of how we think life should be, and we open up ourselves to possibility to choose the life that we want to live.
Mm-hmm.
So self-mastery, even in the statement self-mastery, the leaders that I work with, and this is both men and women at this point, get attached to this as being an achievement.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, mastery sounds like you're a master. You have figured it out, and
Yes. And,
I
and
told my kids the other day, let me go upstairs and figure life out. And they're laughing at me. They're like, you have life figured out. And I went, okay, if anyone ever tells you they have life figured out, then stay far away from that person. Cause I think we're all just trying to figure it out, right? It's all like this perpetual mastery or unfoldingness.
yeah, so mastery isn't an achievement, it's a way of being.
Mm,
And if we look at this just for a second, in a sense, if you're going to do inner work, there are seemingly steps to inner work, right? So you have this awakening, and then you start with self-exploration. So let me start exploring my thought process, my experiences, and then you have self-discovery, which is that you start to then come to the experience to discovering your part in that experience. And then that brings you into self-awareness. So in self-awareness, we can be aware of both the areas that limit us and both the areas that we are limitless. So we have the duality of the yin and yang, the polarity of both. And then self-mastery is moving from acting on the things that limit us to acting and thinking in an aligned way for the things that empower us. Now, with that, I'm going to go back to self-mastery being a way of being, because really there's some characteristics of somebody who is being a self-master. I almost said attain because it's that tricky. Being a self-master.
yeah.
One of those is that you are always open to all possibilities, that you keep your mind open, that there is no right or wrong, that I'm open to looking at all possibilities and not using judgment, but using discernment to choose which possibility I would like to experience. Judgment is there's a finality to judgment, and judgment equals right or wrong. Judgment equals good or bad, innocent or guilty, evil or good. That's what judgment equals. Discernment equals I am open to all things. There is no judgment of these things, and I'm simply choosing what I believe will be in alignment with the reality that I want to create. So openness is that. The second one is willingness. A willingness to continue to do the steps of self-exploration, self-discovery, self-awareness, and bringing it to mastery. Self-exploration, self-discovery, it's constantly doing this because you are transforming through your experiences. I can have an experience tomorrow that can be incredibly painful, that if I just say, oh, I'm a master, I'm above this pain, then I'm just avoiding it and I'm putting it to the side, and now it's lingering with me. I have to accept that, hey, maybe I made a choice that was eliciting some pain. And then in that acceptance, being able to look at it through this lens to become a master of this painful experience once again. The last thing I would say is that, and this is a big thing in the light workers and healers, especially healers, they think they've been healed. Healed is an egoic term. That means that you've arrived somewhere. And I'm here to tell you that you are healing your entire life. And what I know to be true for myself is that in unity consciousness, that we are actually not healed until we go back to God and we are reunited with God. And there's a couple of books out there, Eva, you know, one of them, that would tell you that this is just one level of consciousness experience, and that we have multiple levels above us of consciousness experience. And in each experience, we're still healing, and we're not healed all the way because we're not back reunited with God as source.
Right.
So the moment I said, I healed from that, is the moment that we've tricked ourselves to believe that there's no more healing to be done.
Yeah. That's the ego, right? Right there. Like, I'm good. I figured it out. I don't need any more help. I'm above that thing, whatever that thing is. Right.
Yep. And then that limits you from going to the next step, right? To the next level of whatever it is. It limits you from accepting all experiences of being that. Something that people get trapped into as well is this idea of authenticity. And that's why I say it's an idea, because the idea of who you are is never actually who you are. The idea is a construct of belief systems of what you believe to be you. But that's never actually who you are. So really, to me, authenticity is the willingness to transform through your experiences. To be open to who you think you are now isn't necessarily going to be who you are 10 years from now, because you're going to have 10 years of experiences that are going to teach you something new about yourself.
Yeah.
But we get trapped into that. We say, no, this is my authentic self. And once you say this is my authentic self, and you start resisting other experiences that are actually coming to you from divine design to come to you to help you grow through your experiences, you become limited to that. And then people wonder why they get stuck. They wonder why they get complacent. Well, because you had it. Now you are disconnected from reality. Now you have an idea of who you are, and that idea is not actually connected with reality. And then reality is happening over here, and experiences are happening and doing all these things, and you're not accepting them. So now you're becoming more and more and more incarcerated by the egoic idea of who you are.
So is the answer then to just be in this sort of constant state of adaptability, to be like a chameleon, like to be able to sort of move with what comes to you and work with it, be able to, like you said, openness, be able to shift sort of those ideas. I mean, we have to have some identities, right? I mean, we're living this human experience,
what if you could have 21 different identities that you could call upon at any time to be that? So now we're getting into the archetypical mind. And the archetypical mind, if anybody ever looks it up, you can look at tarot cards, but you could also read about the archetypical mind. And there's different archetypes that what we could say is that God has created that people typically attach themselves to as a personality. So for instance, there is the jester is an archetype. Well, the jester represents like being comedic and being joyful in life and funny and stuff like that. You have the king. The king represents being a monarch, but a monarch of yourself, right? Like being in your kingly state. The warrior represents courage and bravery and all these different. So there's these different archetypes. So we have this training called the Journey to Nobody, and the nobody doesn't have anything that it's attached to. It's just your true essence. And if you come from a place of nobody, you might have come up with a statement for yourself that says, "I'm not funny." Well, guess why you're not funny? because you say you're not funny.
Mm-hmm.
Right? But what if you said, well, you know what? I can be funny because all I have to do is channel the energy of humor and funny. Okay, I'm going to bring in funny into it and then allow that to go through and see what happens. So we actually, you could say it's a chameleon, but it's really just the ability to understand that you can access any way of being that you want to access just through choice and belief is what it is. Choice, choosing it, and then believing that I can be that way.
Mm.
And that's where really, again, we talk about like being a master of nothing, right? So if I'm a master of nothing, then I'm simultaneously a master of everything. It's a paradox. We find ourselves in paradoxes in this dimension or reality that we find ourselves in because of what we're being told is true to what is being true inside of us, and then trying to formulate some sort of balance between these things. But really, what I'm telling you is that the more you try and balance your outside world with your inside world, the more you get lost on the inside. So what I say and what I help my clients with is like we do like an I am statement. So I have them identify with like some characteristics that feel really true with them. Right. So mine's like I'm a loving, courageous, compassionate, tender, honorable, powerful creator. Right. So I can say these things, but even more so, I can also be angry if I want to be. Right. I'm an angry person. No, I'm just being angry in this moment. I can think of other characteristics. I can be joyful. I don't have joyful in this I am statement, right? It doesn't mean that I'm limited to not being joyful. It just means that I can say, I choose to be joyful right now. So I'm gonna have joy. So it is good to have some sort of grounding, I would say, and what you feel like would be the characteristics that would drive the behavior that you would want to exhibit in alignment to that. But also don't limit yourself to the fact that, hey, this is just who I am, because ultimately you can be whatever you choose to be. And what you choose to be has an infinite possibility of choice.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Can you talk a little bit about the highest forms of love? And I want to come back to you're in a relationship now, and I'm sure it's very different than how you were showing up, or you are showing up differently than how you were showing up with your ex-wife or other partners in your life. So I'm curious what that looks like. How are you experiencing that differently? So for someone out there who maybe is stuck still in those addiction patterns, or very much in the sort of the awakening phase, coming into this sort of different ways of being, what can they look forward to? How did you know there's maybe not an arrival, but like what is different about now in that relationship, and I don't even know if it ties to the highest forms of love, but what are those highest forms of love?
Yeah, so I mean, absolutely does, because I choose to operate that way as best I can, as consciously as I can. In my relationship now, we have complete transparency with each other. And I'm not going to say that we're completely honest with each other, but we are completely transparent. What I mean by that is that we've had moments where we have been dishonest with each other, but then a day later come back and say, hey, I can't hold this in anymore. I had an old reaction to an old program. I lied about this thing. The reason why I lied about this thing is I'm really shameful about this thing. I didn't have the awareness at the time, and I just want to tell you that I lied. I'm truly sorry. Right? We've had multiple moments like that, and the reason why we can be that way with each other is, I'll go on to one of the highest forms of love, is grace. So even in the Bible, in Revelations, there's 7 trumpets that are blown, and the 7th trumpet that is blown represents grace. And to me, the difference between forgiveness and grace is that forgiveness is that you forgive somebody for an instant, and grace is that you're already forgiven. And when we think about God's grace, that's what it is. Like, God is love and God is grace. Here's some of the things that really don't make sense in a lot of religions, especially Christianity. They say you have to, repent for your sins. Well, God is infinite. God knows what you're going to do now, knows what you've done, knows what you're going to do. And still loves you. That's
Right.
grace, right?
Yeah.
And sure, forgiveness, and people get so lost in forgiveness sometimes because they ask God for forgiveness, but they forget that they need to ask themselves for forgiveness. Because you're ultimately God expressing yourself as human. So as long as you look outside of yourself and ask for forgiveness, even if it's God and you perceive him as being outside of yourself, then you're not actually going to experience the forgiveness, because you need to forgive yourself as God pretending to be human, because God's already inside of you. It's the light, it's the source. But grace, again, being that highest form of the feminine, is literally that it gives people space to make mistakes, And also the space to know that if I do make a mistake, if I am dishonest, if I fall to my own standard of honesty, that the person is not going to leave me for it. And if
Mm-hmm.
I know that the person is not going to leave me for it, then I have more courage to tell the person that I made the mistake, so that we then get to learn through an experience. That's the beautiful thing about mine and Julia's relationship, is that we have a very divine couple experience where we understand that, hey, we're not perfect. Like, we're going to make mistakes, but if I don't feel safe to come to you and tell you that I made a mistake, then I'm just going to hold it in, and I'm going to hold in that guilt. I'm going to hold in that shame. Then ultimately, guess what? I'm going to loop myself back into self-sabotage in some sort of way, because these are causalities of this. So that is one side, right? That really brings in that feminine aspect of God's grace. On the other side, we have integrity. So when we look at integrity, integrity is essentially being your word. It is upholding your personal commitments and following through with them. And having integrity inside of what you're creating is of God as well. John 1:1, right? In the Bible, it says, in the beginning, there was the Word, and the Word was God. The Word was with God. I'm paraphrasing, right? But ultimately, even in the Bible, it says the Word is what created this reality. So what do? When we create our reality through our words. And if we are creating a reality where we're committing to something and then we're making excuses and reasons on why we're not actually committing to that thing, then we're putting more energy to our reasons and our excuses, and that's what we're creating, not getting the result that we want. But if I'm going to be my word and integrity in my word, well, what that does inside of a relationship is that it means that Julia can count on me, that she can trust me, that she can trust that I'm going to show up for her, right? Because I'm showing up for myself. And when we think about integrity, we think about integrity in a way of integrity of a bridge. Like, when I drive my car across a bridge, I want to know that bridge isn't going to collapse on me. Well, when Julia leans on me, she wants to know that I'm not going to fall over, that she can count on me. So this is really where this sense of wholeness comes from, and also, belief and self-love is being your word. It's that simple. But then when you aren't your word, you're a fraud to your own word. This is a source of imposter syndrome. People wonder why they have imposter syndrome. You have imposter syndrome because you say you want to do something, you're not doing it. You're a fraud to your own word. So of course you're going to feel like an imposter.
Mm.
So this is really that duality of what I would say on the masculine side of this highest form of love is integrity, and inside of integrity, it's honesty. I was talking to somebody the other day, and they were talking about people pleasing, essentially that they're a people pleaser, and the ego has tricked them to believe that it's not selfish. It is selfish. You're not being honest with that person because you're afraid that you're going to hurt their feelings. That's selfish.
Mm.
The highest form of love is, to me, to say what I intuitively believe that I should say to this person in let's just say an attempt to wake them up to their own bullshit.
Mm-hmm.
Right. But if you're not going to be honest with them and you're going to essentially buy into their own reasons, you're going to buy into their own story, then all you're doing is basically saying it's okay to suffer. It's okay to suffer. Keep suffering. So people are afraid to be honest, and they're afraid to be honest because, again, a lot of these people pleasing tendencies of wanting to be liked, and ultimately you're being selfish. This is not service to others. This is service to self.
Yeah.
And
Well, and
you,
it's the fear of being rejected, not being accepted, not having the connection. I mean, that was my marriage. It was a fear. Like, we fought like twice my entire marriage because I thought, if we fight, we will get a divorce. Like, I don't know where that came from, but like, that was the story. And then when, I heard in therapy, oh no, fighting is good. When you have little breaks and then you can mend and come back together. I was like, what? People do that? You mean you can just be real, you can be honest, and someone can hold space for that, and you can grow through that? I mean, it was such a bizarre concept to me because I just thought conflict equals everything falling apart. And I didn't know how to do that, how to hold space for integrity.
yeah, and the fear is what ultimately manifested for you. You
Mhm.
guys,
Yeah, oh, yeah,
the,
exactly.
the fear is what ultimately manifested for me. And that's why it's so incredibly important to acknowledge what you're afraid of so that you don't have to be afraid of it anymore. This is, again, back to our Hermetic principles, the principle of vibration, the principle of correspondence. Whatever you vibrate at, you're going to correspond and experience. Fear has its own vibration. I think it's 100 hertz. And when we don't acknowledge our fears, we end up manifesting our fears because that's what's running under all the bullshit that we're saying,
Yeah.
all the lies that we're saying. What we're saying is that we're not afraid because we're not willing to accept it. But
Yeah.
the wild thing is once we're willing to accept that we are afraid, the fear goes away. And
Yeah.
then we have an opportunity to choose courage and step into what it means to, heal from the fear
Right.
and act in a different way.
Isn't that so interesting? You saying that, I remember being in high school. I've known Chad, my ex-husband, since we were in 6th grade. And I remember being in high school and sitting on the beach one night and saying to him, my biggest fear is being alone, is being alone. And so, I married the person who was with me since 6th grade. I had 6 kids, because I have a fear of being alone. Like, wild how that has then, that fear, even though, I mean, that's probably not why I had 6 kids. Some of it was I wasn't trying. They just sort of came. But still, that was also a choice. I guess I had a choice to have sex to, the pull and pray method doesn't quite work all the time. You could end up with twins. So yeah, but it's interesting how I can see that underlying fear, which probably is rooted back into stuff from childhood, right? Wherever those fears, abandonment, wherever those things come from. And then all my choices, whether it's conscious or subconscious, are made from that place of like, well, what's going to get me to not be alone? Right? I mean, that's what I'm hearing you say is that.
Yeah, it's because your thought process. So when we have this, we have fear or whatever it is, that's the emotion, but typically it's fear. The fear creates a belief system. The belief creates behavior. And then again, the ego takes that and says, this is who I am. And the majority of our belief systems are built off of fear, because when we come into the world, we come into the world perfect, with so much wonderment and curiosity about our reality until our parents' fear of whatever, starts to become our belief system. For instance, you might be a child on a playground, and then you go too far from the playground, and then your parent gets afraid that they can't find you, and then comes and finds you and runs. And it's like all this fear is being given to this kid. And now the kid has a belief that they can't go too far away from their parents. How would that manifest later on in life? Maybe they end up living with their parents. Maybe they never end up leaving the town they grew up in because they want to be close to their parents, right? Like that the kid could have created that belief instantly. I can't get too far away from my parents. And that drove all their behavior all the way into adulthood.
Wow.
Right. So yes, it is that. So again, going into the healing aspect of this is realizing that fear is real, but it isn't real simultaneously. It's an illusion. The reason why I say fear is an illusion is because it's based off personal bias. My girlfriend is afraid of spiders. I'm not afraid of spiders. Automatically makes it an illusion, right? Whatever you choose to be afraid of is your choice, and it's your illusion that you create from that choice. So we have to start looking at these things and really understanding, like, this is the healing process of going through it. And really starting to understand, and this goes back to just a self-mastery thing, is that I'm always aware that I could be simultaneously unworthy and worthy. I'm also always willing to feel if I'm feeling unworthy. Because if I split off unworthiness and I don't want to feel unworthiness, then ultimately it's still running in the background. We like to say, what you resist will persist. So it's still running in the background that I'm feeling unworthy with everything I'm doing. But if I just integrate it and say, okay, I accept that I'm feeling unworthy, and then I sit in it, science shows us that it takes about 90 seconds for an emotion to pass if you just focus on it. So then I focus on it. So, okay, I'm going to sit here. Matter of fact, 2 days before the training, I was going through my own shit. And I wrote probably the most heinous stuff I've wrote in my journal about myself in a long time. And in this chair that I'm sitting in, I just put my head on my desk and I was sobbing for about 90 seconds. And then it went away. And then I popped my head up. I said, okay, being unworthy is one possibility. What's another possibility? Well, that I'm infinitely worthy. So this is mental alchemy. And I'm going to make sure I say this, that this only works once you've done the self-work to get to this point. Like, this is a self-mastery tool. This isn't a self-discovery tool.
Okay.
Where I'll say, okay, here's unworthiness. Cool, that's one possibility. Then I bring worthiness forward and I observe both possibilities. So I'm looking at essentially the black and white of the yin and yang, the unworthy black, the worthiness white. Now I activate my free will. What do I choose to be? Well, I choose to be worthy. Once I chose to be worthy, all this uncomfortability goes out of my body. I can physically feel my vibration changing. And then I become into a worthy aspect. And then I went about my day and I had one of the best days I've had in a while. With the morning started off the way it did. But why did that become that? Because of the duality of my willingness and my openness and my willingness to feel the intensity of my shame so that I can also feel the intensity of my joy.
Yeah.
People that go ahead.
Sorry, that's part of it, right? I mean, like, you've been doing this for a while and you have all this wisdom and knowledge around this. And yet here you are a couple of days ago. I mean, maybe the difference between you and someone else is someone else would really sit and wallow in it, and it would become the story they would tell themselves for decades maybe, right? But for you, you're able to sort of pinpoint it quicker, move through it a little bit faster, but it's still prevalent. I mean, it's something that's probably going to be around forever, right? We're human beings, and we're always going to have moments of guilt, shame, jealousy, whatever, envy, right? Whatever those lower vibrational things are. I mean, can we get away from them forever? Or is it just like accept it and move through it and become a master at our feelings and emotions?
Yeah, for what I know to this point is that you can shift the amount of time, if we were to say in percentages, that you experience unworthiness to worthiness. So when you think about this, again, we say what you resist will persist. What that means is that you don't want to feel unworthy, but you keep feeling unworthy. You just don't want to accept that. So then as you're going throughout your day, you have this uncomfortable feeling in your gut. Maybe you call it anxiety, maybe you call it stress, whatever you call it, right, is really at a causality of unworthiness that you're not willing to accept. And now everything that you create has a vibration of shame. Everything that you do, you feel blocked on. You feel not creative, right? Because you're not willing to accept this thing. Well, that would say that, let's just say over a month that you're experiencing it 100% of the time because you're not willing to feel it. Well, now I say, no, I'm willing to feel it. I'm feeling this right now. I'm going to feel it. I'm going to sit in it. What are the thoughts? What are the emotions? What my body feel like? And then it passes through. And then I choose worthiness. Well, after I choose worthiness and it passes through, now I've made a new choice, and that choice is creating my reality. And now I start to create from that choice of worthiness. Now, maybe over a month by doing this practice, let's say you feel unworthy 50% of the time and you feel worthy 50% of the time. Well, you've now drastically increased the amount of time that you're in a worthiness vibration than you were from an unworthiness vibration. And now the trick to subconscious remapping and the subconscious is that the subconscious program is built off of choices that you've made in the present moment in your past. And these choices have now created a program, and the program predicts how you're going to act in your present behavior. This is what we consider triggers, right? The subconscious program is just triggering you to choose what you chose before. Well, by doing this practice, I'm now consciously choosing worthiness, and I'm mapping that conscious choice into my subconscious program. And over time, then I start to just ultimately feel better about who I am because I'm consciously choosing how I want to be and how I want to act as a creator. So over time, maybe it goes from 50-50 for a month, and then maybe the next month it's 75-25, and maybe the next month it's 90-10. And again, don't get attached to the time periods that I'm using. I'm just using it as an example that this starts to occur, but I'm still human. So to me, the difference between conscious and unconscious, and I was talking about subconscious, which is our program, is unconscious is when I'm unconscious that I am God pretending to be human, that I am God, that I have my divinity in it. And consciousness is my divinity of God, my divinity of choice. Unconscious is the victim, that I can't do anything about it, right? Conscious is that I'm the creator. I can do anything about it. And I am simultaneously both. This is the paradox. What's the difference? Well, my free will choice of the observer to choose. So the observation of all possibilities allows me to choose the one, again, that I would like to serve, that serves me in what I'm creating in the world.
So can I ask you, was there, and you don't have to say specifically what it is, but you know, this moment that you had before where you kind of broke down and were like, okay, unworthy to worthy. Was there an action that preceded it? Was there something that happened, some sort of pattern behavior that you were like, oh, and this brings up the unworthiness? Or is it just like just sitting there and all of a sudden thinking, I'm unworthy? Is there, why I'm asking that is because I look in my own life and I think when I feel unworthy around something, there's an action either I took or didn't take that when you talk about that authentic self, that like that deeper me was like, Eva, you being true to your word. You said you were going to go to the gym and then you didn't. And that's now you're feeling, and then that starts playing out. Right. So it's like a choice that I either make or don't make that then leads to these undesirable feelings. So can I just be smart enough to not even make the choice to lead down the path? Does that make sense?
Yeah, so I would say smart. It's not an intellectual thing. It's just
Okay.
awareness.
Yeah.
It's just awareness. It's just awareness.
Okay,
Can I be
awareness.
aware?
Yes.
Right? Can I be aware? Once you get to a certain level of awareness, I guess you can say, is that I'm very in tune with just energy. So if I'm feeling uncomfortable in my gut, I don't necessarily need to start then contemplating what's happening in my mind. I just know that the gut uncomfortability is associated with some sort of fear or shame or something like that. I'm like, oh, I'm feeling uncomfortable. And then I can simply observe it as energy. And as I'm observing as energy, I'm like, this energy doesn't feel great, right? I don't need to really do the exploration of what it is. What energy do I want to be in right now? What can I choose? How can I raise my vibration? Oh, I want to choose love. Okay, I'm choosing love. And then I'll just sit in it and I'll just start to experience and observe my body getting out of this uncomfortable feeling and going to that. The specific thing is I wanted to be right about a story. Again, not perfect, right? I wanted to be right about the story. And the story is that back in September, my current partner, Shane, we ended up partnering together. This is the gentleman that I do the Journey to Nobody with, and we've created a conscious creators community, which is what we do now. And I had a business prior to this where I was doing this work, and it was my scaling year. What I mean by that is that I had a couple of years of like $250,000 in revenue, and this past year, like I was on track to getting about 750, and could have been even higher. Who knows what could have happened, right? That's what I was on track for.
Right.
And then when I moved into partnering with Shane, there were ways that Shane was doing this before, which wasn't really for a financial gain. It wasn't as a business. It was out of his own, volition. It was almost like a charity thing that he was doing, but he realized that to be able to do this on a mass scale, it couldn't be done this way anymore, right? So then going into it from September down to December, my revenue drastically dropped. I mean, because the trainings we were doing weren't generating any revenue. But through that process, I was starting to realize where all the gaps are and being able to create this thing that was charity into a business and how we can do this. But what happened was again, I got into a financial hole. So I got into this financial hole, and what I call a hole is basically I was breaking even every single month instead of like actually continuing to.
Yeah. Being ahead, right?
And I was also and still am, even though I had my business that was separate. We didn't actually join into an LLC until this year, so I was using a lot of the money that was in my business already to fund, right, the conscious creators community and the Journey to Nobody. That's what was being funded. I was using my people, my everything else was being funded this thing, but I was getting no return. So I was attached to the story. I was attached to the story that, hey, I am where I am right now because of what I've sacrificed to get there.
Mm-hmm.
And what did I do? Well, like, sure, I was right about that story, and I kept creating the same result of not generating the revenue that I needed to generate. Well, Shane is not only a partner of mine, but he also is a great mentor to me, and we were able to have a very open conversation and, again, look at what works and what doesn't work and create solutions. And in this last training that we did, we ended up making a pretty good profit. Like, we're actually starting to move into like, oh, okay, we can make this a business and how we do this. But there was just a lot of resistance that I was feeling inside of it. So I got to the point where inside of my own, revenue and what I've done is that taxes are coming up. And I was like, oh, well, I don't have enough money at this point to pay taxes. What are we going to do? And that's what put me into it. So I got dropped into scarcity.
Yep.
Right. Based off the story that I wanted to be right about. And I was just, I acted like a child one day on the call. I was like, and I saw that. That's what I journaled out. I was like, you acted like a fucking kid, like a child yesterday, like a pouty child. What are you doing, man? Right. And that's like, getting my victim ego, right, showing up. And then, but once I wrote it all out and I sat in it, literally, like I said, after that, I had the best day ever. And, Shane flew in for the training that we just did in Austin. And like, I talked about it with him, and, we're great. Everything's back to being what it is and what it needs to be. And we have there's some incredible opportunities that have come from this last training, specifically doing these trainings for B2B and also doing integration programs inside of B2B. And if anybody's on the call that understands what B2B is, B2B pays well. So it's like I put down into this hole, and then now it's like, look at all these opportunities that came from this just from shifting the state. And I've been calling these things in right in January and February because I knew it was coming, and then not trusting that it was coming until this training came. And now it's like, oh, here's all the things you've been calling in. But with that, I was still managing myself. And if I were to like guess where I was in my own being of percentages of scarcity and abundance, was about 50-50. Right. So still that 50% of vibration held weight, right, in creating a corresponding experience. I also create a corresponding experience of being a pouty child, right? So there's the paradox of the duality of both.
So can I ask, just for those that are wondering out there, you have this business and it's scaling. This was your scaling year, where you're going to just be making all this money, and then you choose to do things differently instead of keeping on the path that you were on that would have just led you to more money. You chose to partner with this other person and go down this other road and bring in this other tool
Yeah.
for transformation for people. So can we just touch on that really quick? Because I think that's huge for people. People are so attached to money, so attached to their jobs, their careers, their identities, their titles, that they're unwilling to shift, even though it might be challenging, have some painful, growthful moments,
Yeah.
or just the unexpected, and sticking with something that they know, well, I've worked hard on this. And so at what point were you like, nope, what was it that you said, I need to shift? I'm going to bring this thing in, and it might be a little bumpy, but it's going to figure itself out. I think that's a really key moment that people don't necessarily take the opportunity to pursue in their life.
Yeah. Purpose, really, really getting into the depth of what I know to be now, to being the deepest I've ever gone into knowing my purpose and creating from my purpose. And what I like to say is, I'll bring in another principle of rhythm from the Hermetic principles, is that the deeper that you surrender into your purpose, the more fear it's going to then elicit from your ego. Because it's the swing, it's the pendulum swing. I'm going deeper and deeper and deeper. Well, guess what's happening? Also, the fear can also become greater and greater and greater. But what is that also doing? Well, ultimately, for me, my purpose and my divine self will always beat fear. So even if the fear is getting louder, ultimately, the divine is always going to win. But I'm still the one in between that is, trying to align my observing and my thought process to which one I want to do. It's still a difficult thing to do, but that's why most people end up being, and anybody that's listening, people can be so afraid, and this might be you. You have a purpose and you have a calling that's deep inside of you, and you know what it is. Maybe you don't know exactly what it is, but you know it's there, but you're afraid of it. Right? You're afraid of it because what comes up from that? Well, maybe I have to quit my job, or maybe I'm making a lot of money doing this thing, or maybe I'm doing all these different things. You make all these different stories based off of fear to not live your purpose. And what is the effect? You don't feel fulfilled in your life. So you're sacrificing fulfillment for money. And for me, the story has been like, once I got out of the corporate world, I was like, well, I don't want to help people. I know my intuitive gift one at the time was that I knew people's patterns. Like, I could logically understand people's patterns. And I loved fitness. So I was a fitness coach and, did pretty well as a fitness coach. At the height of my fitness coaching, I was making $500,000 a year in revenue. 2019, I had the first thought in my mind, because I started to integrate emotional intelligence and consciousness, and I started to integrate that into my fitness coaching. But I was like, this is great, and I can make a bigger impact. How do I make a bigger impact? Well, then I'm going to go to leaders and entrepreneurs. So then I was like, I'm going to be an emotional intelligence performance coach for leaders and entrepreneurs. I did that for a little bit. And then what drove me deeper? Consciousness. Oh, consciousness is actually a blanket for all of this. Well, what is consciousness? Oh, now I started working on consciousness, self-mastery, and everything else. And okay. So then that brought me to a depth of it. But one of the key components that I know inside of being self-mastery and consciousness is that knowledge only comes through experience. So I can be with my clients for an hour every single week. And I do this with my clients anyways. Yeah, we're going to dive deep and we're going to talk and I'm going to teach and everything else. But I'm going to give you action items to go integrate, because no matter what we talk about here, you're just at the level of understanding. You're not at a level of knowing because you're not experiencing it. So I would manufacture or create experiences for them to go out and experience it, and they report back to me. Well, then what am I calling in? Well, this training. Because this training is essentially 3 days of experiences that create awakening, healing, and integration in 3 days. And it's so incredibly powerful. I call it miraculous, like what happens inside the training room, that it was a perfect marry. So once I experienced it myself, because I went through the training, and then I experienced being a guide or a staff inside of the training room, that experience then brought the knowing into my purpose. And I said, it doesn't matter what's happening at this point. It doesn't matter what happens with my money. It doesn't matter what happens. Like, everything's going to be fine. It's going to work out. Right. And I have to remind myself of that a lot, especially when numbers start to decline that you expect to go up, right? That you want to be right about. So that's what drove me into the spot. So where I am now is that I feel as if I found a perfect marry between the style of coaching that I brought forward, guidance, mentorship, to an experiential training that then collapses time on their healing. And the marrying of the two things together has created miraculous results for people. You've had the experience, the people that come through it, we've got people that are addicted to porn for years that go through the training and then they never touch porn again. We have people that are on the verge of divorce, and this couple goes through the training and they have the most beautiful relationship afterwards. We've also had people that are on the verge of divorce. They go through the training that afterwards choose not to be together.
Yep.
Why? Because that's the choice that you've known that you should have been making for a while, but you've avoided. All it does is basically make it so that you know exactly what you need to be doing with your life. The next part of it is integrating it, right? To be able to live and be courageous about living that knowing. And that's a completely different story. But that's what brought me to this point, is just continuing to surrender deeper and deeper inside of myself to know what is true. And then as I surrender deeper inside of myself, guess what? The universe corresponded experiences for me to choose and to grab at these opportunities to create.
Yeah. And it's a process, right? It's not necessarily easy. Like, here's the opportunity. Okay, everything's going to just be rainbows from here on out. It's still like you said, integrating in. How do we work together? What does this look like? How do we make it profitable? And then that's the work, right? That's the actual work, is figuring out how to incorporate in the thing. But saying yes to the opportunity
Yes.
was amazing. So
Yep.
yes. Okay. 2 minutes. Let's do this. Let's wrap up.
Sure.
Final thoughts, my friend. And then where can people get in touch with you?
So if I were to give you guys anything for a final thought, is to say that you are the creator and you're the cause of everything that happens in your life. You are the one creating it. And there is a huge empowerment inside of that. And at first, you might be adamantly rejecting what I'm saying right now, your ego. But I believe that your nobody, your inner knowing, who you truly are, is awakening through this process. And once you awaken to it, you actually know. So have courage to go out and create the life of your dreams, because you deserve it. We are not unequal. Matter of fact, in the eyes of the creator, we are both equal, and our equal value is infinite. That is what true equality is. It is the recognition of one and another, to know that, hey, you're equal to me, and we both have infinite value and power to be able to create the life that we want to create. So go out and do it, and stop waiting, because you might only live once. You might get reincarnated multiple times, but I will tell you, the experience that you're having right now is real. And why not get the most out of the experience that you have right in front of you? Where you can find me on all social media outlets, I am Zack Blakeney. You can, I guess, if you're looking at the show notes or whatever, you can see the title and see my name. Luckily, nobody has my name. With that, my self-mastery program is www.unleashyourg.com/today. You can check out the Journey to Nobody training, www.thejourneytonobody.com. And you can always reach out to me on social media. You can ask me any questions through my DM. I do not withhold information. I'm here to serve you, and sending you guys lots of love and gratitude.
Zack, thank you so much. Hang on 1 second. Let me say bye to everyone, and then I'll say bye to you. Thank you so much for being on the show, and for all your wisdom, and for going over time just to dive into these subjects. I know we could talk probably for hours.
Yeah.
So thank you for everyone for hanging on, and for being there today. Thank you, Zack. I appreciate you guys so much. And in this effort to try to figure out how we can human better, how do we do this life better? And then I find people that I come across in this world, and I think, you're cool. I want to interview you. You know some things. And Zack is one of those people. So I hope there's some takeaways for you today. This is one of those episodes you might need to go back and listen to again and again, because there are so many nuggets in here. I was taking notes along the way. Thank you. Have a beautiful, blessed day. And until next time, be well.